Meet Charles Rutherford. Once a billionaire, now a man on the edge of his life. He stood at the top of the world, with the city at his feet, power at his fingertips, and wealth beyond imagination. But none of it could save him from what was coming. He was admired, envied, feared. But behind closed doors he was alone. Then one day, everything changed. A doctor's words cut through his world like a blade. Terminal cancer. Just months to live. No cure. No second chance. In a blink, the empire he built started to crumble. And the people he trusted most? They turned their backs. But what he did next? No one could have predicted it. Charles had been betrayed by the man he once called a brother, Greg Lawson. Together, they had turned a garage idea into a tech empire. But greed has no loyalty. While Charles struggled with his diagnosis, Greg was quietly orchestrating a hostile takeover, bleeding Charles's company dry and replacing loyal executives with wolves in suits. The media had a field day. Investors fled. Friends disappeared. And the people who once begged for his attention now laughed behind his back. But none of that hurt as much as the silence from his own daughter. Estranged for years after a bitter divorce, she hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. Alone.
Dying.
Forgotten. Charles sat in that empty penthouse and wondered, was this really how it all ends? And then one night, something strange happened. Flipping through late-night news, he stopped on a segment about 3 inner-city boys. Brothers in spirit, if not in blood. Abandoned. Neglected. Passed from home to home. 10, 12, 14. Their eyes told a story he couldn't ignore. They weren't asking for pity. They were just surviving.
Barely.
And, in that moment, something inside Charles cracked. These boys had every reason to give up, and yet they hadn't. And for the first time in a long time, Charles felt something he hadn't felt in years, a reason. Not for legacy, not for wealth, but to matter. The next morning, without telling a soul, Charles made a decision that stunned the world. He was going to adopt all 3 of them, Micah, Jalen, and Tyrell. The headlines called him delusional, reckless, desperate. But Charles didn't care. Because for once, he wasn't doing it for them. He was doing it for himself. The black SUV pulled into the driveway of the group home, a cracked brick building nestled between 2 boarded-up houses. Charles stepped out in his tailored coat, the cold wind biting against his face. For a moment, he stood still not because of the chill, but because of the weight of what he was about to do. Inside, 3 boys sat on worn couches, not speaking, not moving. They'd heard about the adoption, but they didn't believe it. Why would a billionaire, some stranger from the other side of the city, want them? Tyrell, the oldest at 14, stared with clenched fists. He didn't trust anyone, especially not some rich man playing savior. Jalen kept his headphones on, sketching something in the corner of his notepad, ignoring the world. And Micah, he just looked tired. 10 years old, and already done with hope. Charles introduced himself awkwardly. He didn't smile, didn't try to charm them. He simply said, "I'm not here to save you. I'm here to try. If you let me." No one responded. The ride home was silent. When the elevator doors opened to the penthouse, the boys stepped out into a different world. High ceilings, polished floors, a view that stretched for miles. But all they saw were walls. Tall, clean, expensive walls. Nothing that felt like home. Charles tried to show them around. Micah barely looked up. Jalen shrugged. Tyrell scoffed and muttered, "This ain't permanent." That first night, Charles stood in the hallway, listening to the sound of silence and distance. Each boy was in his own room, door closed, heart sealed. He sat in the kitchen and asked himself the question that had haunted him since the diagnosis. What am I supposed to do now? Over the next few days, the awkwardness turned into cold routine. Breakfasts were quiet. Dinners were worse. They avoided him. He avoided breaking them. But even in the discomfort, something was shifting. Micah started to linger near the living room whenever Charles set up his virtual reality gear. He didn't say much, just watched. Jalen wandered into the study one afternoon and left a small piece of graffiti art on the back of a notepad.
Bright. Raw. Alive.
Tyrell? He stayed guarded. One night, Charles found a hole punched in the hallway wall. Tyrell never admitted it, but he didn't need to. Charles didn't yell. He didn't scold. He patched the wall and left it at that. He was trying, not to control them, but to understand them. Because these boys weren't just angry. They were hurting. And healing takes time. Micah was the first to speak. One morning, as Charles worked on his old laptop, Micah crept up behind him and asked, "What does that do?" pointing at a piece of coding software. Charles looked surprised but nodded. "Come sit. I'll show you." That became their thing. Every evening, Charles would explain simple tech concepts. Micah didn't say much, but his eyes lit up in a way that told Charles more than words ever could. Jalen was different. He never asked for attention, but his sketches began showing up everywhere. On napkins, on notebooks, on walls, tiny designs and powerful expressions. Charles began collecting them, framing them, displaying them in the house. He didn't mention it, just did it. One evening, Jalen saw one of his framed pieces hanging in the foyer. He paused for a long time before whispering, "No one's ever kept my drawings before." Charles replied, "They're yours. But they mean something to me, too." Tyrell was still a storm. One night, Charles heard shouting from the boys' room. The sound of things breaking. He rushed in, expecting violence, but instead saw Tyrell on the floor, tears streaming down his face, fists clenched. "You don't know what it's like to be thrown away," he screamed. Charles sat beside him, silent, present. "You're right," Charles finally said. "I don't know what you've been through, but I know what it feels like to be alone, to be told your life is over. And, if you let me, I'd like to prove that it's not." Tyrell didn't respond, but he didn't push him away either. That was a start. Late into the nights, Charles began diving into articles, books, documentaries about trauma, foster care, abandonment. He wasn't just trying to be a guardian, he was trying to be their anchor. "I thought I was the one giving them a second chance," Charles later said. "But I realized they were giving me mine." The penthouse that once echoed with silence began to shift. Still cautious, still fragile, but alive. The boys weren't calling him Dad. Not yet. But they were starting to see him as something else. Someone who stayed. Someone who stayed. It happened on a Thursday. The call came in just before noon. Jalen had gotten into a fight at school. Not a scuffle. A real fight. Bruises. Blood. Principal's office. Police involved. Charles rushed to the school, trying to stay composed. When he arrived, Jalen sat in a hard plastic chair, arms folded, eyes cold. "He called me a thug," Jalen muttered when Charles asked what happened. "Said I didn't belong here. Said I was just another throwaway." The principal warned of expulsion. A zero-tolerance policy. Charles didn't argue. Didn't yell. He looked at Jalen, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet grief. On the ride home, silence stretched between them again. But this time, it wasn't stubborn. It was raw. That night, the house was tense. No TV. No laughter. No music. Just shadows. Tyrell was the one who broke it. He knocked on Charles's door around midnight. Eyes low, voice unsure. "You still up?" Charles nodded. Tyrell hesitated, then spoke, his voice cracking like an old record. "You don't get it, man. Every place we go, we're just waiting for it to fall apart. Waiting to get moved. Thrown away. You think Jalen snapped because of that one kid? Nah. He snapped 'cause this whole world keeps telling us we don't matter. You think we don't see the way people look at us?" Charles sat down, feeling the weight of Tyrell's truth. "We learned not to trust, not to hope. 'Cause every time we did, we got burned." Charles closed his eyes. "I know that kind of fear, Tyrell. I've lived it too. Not in the same way, but I know what it's like to lose everything and wonder if you ever really mattered to begin with." He looked up. "But I swear to you, I'm not leaving. I'm not giving up. Not on you. Not on Jalen. Not on any of you." The house stayed quiet that night, but something inside it shifted. Narrator 30:00 50:00. From that day forward, everything changed. Not all at once. Not with fireworks or dramatic speeches. But in small, steady ways. Charles began looking deeper, not just at the boys, but at himself. He realized he couldn't patch their wounds with money or fill the silence with gifts. They didn't need luxury. They needed presence. They needed someone who saw them. He started waking up early with Micah, sitting beside him as he learned how to build code, messy, glitch-filled programs that never quite worked until they did. Micah had an idea one night. What if I could build something that listens to kids like us? Something that doesn't just answer, but understands. Charles smiled. Then let's build it. They started designing an AI-based voice companion, something simple but intuitive. A tool for kids dealing with trauma to speak, even when they didn't know how. Micah named it Echo. While Charles and Micah worked on Echo, Jalen asked a question of his own. Can I paint one of the walls? Just one. I got an idea. Charles didn't just say yes. He cleared an entire room. Jalen painted for days. Spray cans, brushes, chalk, acrylics. He poured everything into it, his fear, his fire, his faith. When it was finished, the room looked like a heartbeat frozen in color. Angry reds, hopeful blues, broken glass textures layered with gold. Jalen called it Rise. Charles stood in awe. It's not perfect, Jalen said quietly. That's why it's powerful, Charles replied. Then there was Tyrell. Still guarded. Still distant. But Charles noticed something. Tyrell never missed a beat when the old piano in the corner was played. He watched music like it was a secret language. Charles brought in someone special, a man named Reggie, a former musician turned youth counselor, who knew the streets, the pain, the pressure. At first, Tyrell resisted. But Reggie didn't push. He just showed up. Again and again. And one afternoon, Charles heard it. A melody. Soft. Unsure. But real. Tyrell was playing. Not perfectly, but passionately. Over the weeks, Reggie and Tyrell started talking, not just about music, but about loss. Rage. Identity. About being a black boy in a world that tried to define him before he ever got the chance. Tyrell started journaling. Started mentoring younger kids at Reggie's community center. He still didn't talk much at home, but his silence began to feel less like a wall and more like peace. Charles watched all of it. And every night before bed, he said the same thing, out loud, even if they weren't listening. I'm proud of you. One night, Micah asked, why do you say that even when we mess up? Charles smiled. Because I'm not proud of perfection. I'm proud of progress. And you've all come so far. The boys didn't call him Dad. Not yet. But now, when he entered the room, they didn't leave. Now, when he smiled, they smiled back. They were beginning to believe. Not just in Charles, but in themselves. And in a home they never thought they'd find. Charles Rutherford was running out of time. The cancer had advanced. The doctors no longer spoke in hopeful terms. They spoke in weeks. Maybe a few months if he was lucky. But Charles didn't flinch. He had something more important than survival now, legacy. While his body weakened, his mind sharpened. And he saw what he hadn't before. Greg Lawson wasn't just ambitious, he was ruthless. Whispers began swirling around the company, departments being restructured, budgets being quietly rerouted, key allies mysteriously removed from projects. Greg was building a kingdom inside Charles's empire. And he wasn't hiding it anymore. Charles had built Rutherford Innovations from the ground up. But now, his own board of directors saw him as a liability, a dying man clinging to control. They were preparing a vote to oust him. Everyone expected Charles to fade away quietly. But they forgot who he was. On the morning of the board meeting, Charles walked into the room wearing a simple black suit, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes tired, but his spirit unbreakable. The boardroom was a battlefield massed in leather chairs and coffee cups. Greg sat at the head of the table, calm, confident. Charles didn't raise his voice. He didn't beg. He simply said, before you vote, hear me out. One last time. Then he turned to the door. 3 boys stepped in, Micah, Jalen, and Tyrell. The room stiffened. Snickers. Whispers. One board member said, "Are we supposed to believe these kids can save $1 billion company?" Charles smiled.
No.
"You're supposed to understand how they already have." Micah took a deep breath. "I built something. It's called Echo AI. It reads emotional patterns in consumer data. It doesn't just react, it understands." He pulled up the dashboard. The data spoke for itself. Near-perfect forecasting of customer behavior, marketing trends, emotional impact of product releases. The room quieted. Jalen stepped forward next. "I took your existing product lines and reimagined them through the eyes of kids from places you ignore. I worked with local street artists, influencers, and brand activists to create campaigns that actually speak to people." Slides appeared. Urban campaign mock-ups. Social virality metrics. Partnerships with underfunded schools and artists. These are the people buying your tech. It's time you stop selling to suits and start listening to souls. And then Tyrell. He didn't bring a presentation. He brought truth. This company? It's lost touch. You can't build innovation when the only people you listen to wear ties. "I started a community outreach program through Reggie's Youth Center. In 3 months, we've created digital learning pods, mentorship groups, and a youth innovation lab powered by your old tech that was just sitting in storage." He looked directly at Greg. "You call that waste? I call it potential." Charles stepped forward again. His voice was low, steady. "I'm dying. That's no secret. And maybe I won't be here to see where this goes. But I refuse to hand my company over to a man who thinks profits matter more than people." He took a breath. "These boys aren't a gimmick. They're the future. And if you can't see that, then you don't belong at this table." The room fell silent. One by one, the board members looked around. Greg tried to speak, tried to pivot, to redirect. But then the door opened again. A forensic accountant stepped in. Behind her, Charles's legal counsel. "We have documents," she said, "detailing Greg Lawson's unauthorized use of company funds. Embezzlement. Bribery. Shell accounts." Stunned silence. Greg paled. For the first time, his smile cracked. One of the board members stood. "Motion to suspend Lawson pending legal review." Another followed. Seconded. The vote was swift. Unanimous. Greg was escorted out of the building that same afternoon. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Micah's Echo AI went public, revolutionizing the way companies understood customer psychology. It didn't just predict, it adapted. The program was adopted by education nonprofits to help teachers understand their students better. Jalen's urban campaign launched to national acclaim. Stores sold out within days. For the first time, Rutherford Innovations felt human, alive, electric. And Tyrell? He didn't want a desk job. He chose the streets. His youth mentorship initiative exploded, partnering with tech brands, schools, and artists. He gave kids what he never had, someone who believed in them. Charles didn't live to see all of it. But in his final days, he sat with the boys on the rooftop of their penthouse, overlooking the city. He watched them laugh. He watched them lead. And he whispered, "You made me proud. Not because you saved a company, but because you became something the world told you you'd never be free." In the end, Charles Rutherford didn't just rewrite his story. He wrote a new beginning for 3 boys the world had forgotten. And the world finally took notice. They didn't laugh anymore. 1 year later, the world hadn't stood still.
It had changed.
But so had he. Charles Rutherford, once a name whispered in boardrooms and headline news for his downfall, now walked into the future, not as a titan, but as a father. His steps were slower now, not from weakness, but from presence. Every movement, every breath, filled with purpose. To his left, Micah, no longer the quiet 10-year-old with wide, uncertain eyes, but a young visionary. His AI startup had already been acquired by an international education firm, yet he insisted on staying grounded, using his skills to bridge technology and opportunity in underserved schools. To his right, Jalen, vibrant, expressive, bold. His street art had transcended city walls and now adorned galleries from LA to Berlin. But He never stopped painting for the kids in his old neighborhood. Every mural told a story of survival and hope. And just behind him, Tyrell, strong, steady, calm. He hadn't just found his voice, he'd become one. Mentoring dozens of young boys, helping them find purpose in music, in rhythm, in resilience. He spoke not with power, but with compassion. He'd become what he never had, a guide. Together, they stepped into the grand entrance of the International Tech for Humanity Conference. Cameras flashed. Crowds gathered. But they didn't flinch, because for the first time they belonged. Their startup, Pulse, wasn't about algorithms or profits. It was about people. Built on the idea that the future of technology wasn't in faster machines or bigger data, it was in empathy. In giving forgotten voices the tools to be heard. And they were the proof. Charles's voice returned, steady and full of emotion. People said I saved them. Truth is, they saved me. I thought I was giving them a second chance. But what they gave me was something I never expected. A reason to live. A reason to love. And a reason to keep going. Asterisk. In the background, applause echoed. A stage awaited. Their names were called. And as they walked up, not as mogul and orphans, but as a family, the world finally understood. This wasn't the story of a billionaire. This was the story of a man who chose to give up everything and gained more than he ever imagined. The final words fade in slowly. The world may laugh, but only the brave can create the future. They listened. Sometimes, the most powerful change doesn't start with a revolution. It starts with one person saying, I won't walk away. Charles didn't set out to be a hero. He just refused to give up on himself, on those boys, on hope. And maybe that's the message we all need right now. That no matter how broken the world seems, no matter how small the spark, a new story can still be written. If this story moved you, if you believe that love, loyalty, and second chances can still change the world, then do one simple thing. Tap that like button. Subscribe to this channel for more true life stories that restore your faith in humanity. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to know how far this message of hope is reaching. You never know, your story might be the next one we tell. Thank you for watching. Stay kind, stay brave, stay human.